Ohjin, staring in disbelief, wondered how such a large body had fit inside the small skin. Selena replied calmly that this was the mystery of nature. The young man gazed at the salamander with sorrow, thinking that now it had grown so big it wouldn't need his help anymore. Deeply moved, he reflected that Bojack was returning to the vast embrace of nature. Smiling through tears, he told the salamander that he wished him happiness, and that he was letting him go because he loved him. He then broke down, crying loudly as he told the salamander to eat well, sleep well, and remember him from time to time. He promised to come every day to leave him food, but Ohjin advised against it, warning that such behavior would erase the salamander's natural instincts. As the young man continued to cry, the salamander darted into the forest, while the young man whispered to himself that he would always be with him in spirit. He wept loudly as he watched Bojack run swiftly toward his freedom. Selena gently comforted the young man, explaining that salamanders didn't understand the idea of having an owner, and that he shouldn't be sad about the abrupt farewell. Then, perhaps a bit coldly, she added that the salamander had likely seen him only as someone who brought it food. This only deepened the young man's despair, and he questioned whether that was truly what Selena called comfort. The three of them sat in the forest, the young man still crying bitterly. Ohjin joked that maybe the salamander had thought of him as someone who cleaned up after him too. Just then, the salamander appeared atop a rock, gathering its energy to form a massive fireball. A powerful explosion followed as the salamander released its flames, drawing everyone's attention in astonishment. From the blast, a display of colorful fireworks lit up the sky, an unexpected spectacle caused by Bojack's unique abilities. Ohjin and Selena watched the fireworks with fascination, while the young man looked on, deeply moved and amazed by what his beloved Bojack had done, proudly commenting on the stunning show. He then looked up at the sky with a joyful smile, praising the salamander as incredible. It was at that moment that the successful treatment of the clinic's first patient, the fire salamander, was officially marked. Sometime later in a public square near a fountain, people had gathered to enjoy the lively atmosphere and music being performed by a local entertainer. The young man appeared on stage, singing passionately and introducing himself as the singer, Roisha. He sang about Ohjin, describing him as the great wizard who defeated the Lord's giant rabbit and opened his eyes like a true poet. Next to him, a children's choir joined in, singing cheerfully about Ohjin, saying that he loved animals and that his touch was like a mother's, making everyone feel better. A percussionist joined the performance, adding to the energy and excitement of the crowd. At that moment, some people in the audience made sarcastic remarks about the singer, and Selena, puzzled, questioned whether he was truly the talented artist everyone claimed him to be. While Ohjin stood among the spectators, bewildered by the strange song, those around him began excitedly asking about the identity of the wizard being praised in the lyrics. It suddenly hit Ohjin that the song had brought him a great deal of fame, and now many people wanted to visit his clinic after hearing it. Days later, crowds gathered in front of Kim Ohjin's animal clinic, banging on the door and shouting to know when it would open, demanding treatment from him. Inside, Ohjin sat overwhelmed, clutching his head from the stress and headaches caused by the non-stop wave of clients. Selena stood nearby, asking if she could resign due to sheer exhaustion, though she also admitted the clinic was experiencing unprecedented success. In the days that followed, the steady flow of patients didn't stop. Ohjin began to feel severely worn out from the constant work, and his demeanor became intimidating during consultations due to the pressure. With a tired smile, he politely told a client to return next week for a follow-up, while internally lamenting that he might be dead from exhaustion before then. Selena laughed and told him to make as much money as he could now, to which Ohjin, drained, replied that he also needed to survive as long as possible, and then asked her to bring in the next patient. 2 months after the clinic's opening, thanks to the viral song, it remained packed with clients, much to Ohjin's amazement. Despite the difficulties of the early days, the profits had been excellent, bringing great joy to both Ohjin and Selena. At that moment, a new visitor entered and politely asked if the clinic was still open. Though exhausted, Ohjin welcomed him in with a smile, calling it financial healing. During this time, Ohjin had come to notice that this world wasn't all that different from his own when it came to raising animals. Outside, people casually discussed their pets' health, just like they would have back in his original world. The townsfolk raised cats and dogs and cared deeply for their well-being, mirroring the behavior he was used to. However, despite the similarities, Ohjin found the species here to be slightly different, and this subtle difference added to his fatigue. While he was lying down, completely drained, Selena told him that the next patient would be the last one, which brought him some relief. He asked about the type of animal awaiting treatment, and Selena replied that its name was Shaman, a breed of hunting dog that had recently become popular as a trendy pet. Ohjin expressed his disapproval of people adopting animals just for fashion trends, wishing those kinds of owners would simply disappear. Selena warned Ohjin that this breed was known for being extremely aggressive toward anyone who wasn't its owner, and that its claws and fangs were sharp enough to pierce the hide of a wild boar with ease. Despite the intimidating description, Ohjin greeted the pet owner kindly as he entered the room. When the cage was opened, a small, adorable white puppy emerged, shaking violently and clearly terrified, despite the breed's reputation for aggression. Selena then casually mentioned that she had forgotten to say the dog was only 3 months old, which took Ohjin by surprise. The owner nervously asked if the dog might be injured, since it had been limping since the previous day, while Ohjin silently wondered where the little dog's legs even were. He began examining the puppy carefully to determine the cause of the limp. Thinking to himself that a 3-month-old's joints should be in good shape, he soon noticed something odd. He found a small thorn lodged in the dog's paw, and the puppy let out a soft whimper of pain. Gently removing the thorn, Ohjin reassured the owner that it had just been a minor issue, and that the dog would be perfectly fine now. Ohjin carefully disinfected the injured area, while the puppy looked content and relaxed after the thorn was removed. Watching the little dog play on the table like a ball of fluff filled Ohjin with joy. He smiled, satisfied, while Selena silently observed him. The dog's owner left the clinic, visibly relieved and happy, and at last, Ohjin let out a deep sigh of relief, saying he had finally finished work for the day. Selena looked at Ohjin, who was lying back on his desk, and told him that he seemed especially cheerful today, which caught him slightly off guard. She asked if his happiness came from how cute the dog was, or simply because he was done with work, gazing at him with curiosity. Irritated, Ohjin asked why she even cared, but she coolly replied that she was just glad to see him happy for reasons that had nothing to do with money. This led Ohjin to accuse her of mocking him again, as usual. He then calmly explained that his happiness came from the fact that none of the animals he had treated that day were seriously injured. He remembered to himself that the hardest part of being a veterinarian was constantly seeing sick or suffering animals. The more he cared about them, the more it hurt, which was why, in the past, he had tried to suppress his emotions and act more detached, but he never truly succeeded. He recalled a past incident involving a client who had left her sick pet with him for an extended period while she went on vacation, which had deeply infuriated him. Since then, Ohjin had developed a habit of treating pet owners more sternly than before. At the end of the day, he asked Selena to quickly tidy up so they could close the clinic before nightfall. But suddenly, a strange man appeared at the window, staring eerily and knocking forcefully on the glass. The man began shouting frantically, calling for Ohjin and desperately asking for help. Startled by the man's appearance, Ohjin jokingly asked Selena if she knew how to exorcise evil spirits, to which she suggested brute force instead. Suddenly, the man burst through the window, screaming for urgent assistance. He rushed in and grabbed Ohjin, dragging him outside in a frenzy. Selena stayed behind, watching the scene through the window in complete bewilderment. Ohjin collapsed to the ground, exhausted from being yanked out so suddenly, while the man quickly apologized. The man sarcastically commented on Ohjin's lack of physical fitness and his inability to climb a hill, prompting Ohjin to tell him angrily to shut up. When Ohjin asked who he was, the man apologized again, saying he had forgotten to introduce himself. He introduced himself as Schwein, a local civil servant in charge of the area. Suddenly, Schwein dropped to his knees and begged Ohjin for help, saying he had heard about how Ohjin once managed to calm the Lord's giant rabbit. In a state of desperation, Schwein pleaded with Ohjin to help them capture a stray dog, leaving Ohjin puzzled by the strange request. Ohjin, supported by Selena, clarified that they weren't an animal rescue team. He was just a vet, and he didn't go around chasing animals. But Schwein continued begging, telling Ohjin that he was their only hope now. Ohjin, confused, asked when exactly he became anyone's last hope, and Schwein sorrowfully replied that they genuinely didn't have any time left. Selena, baffled, asked what he meant by time, prompting Schwein to explain that around 2 months ago, a dog had taken control of a specific area in the mountains. He went on to say that the area the dog had claimed was part of the route for a planned road construction project, and despite multiple attempts, they had failed to catch it due to its incredible speed. Ohjin, concerned, asked what would happen if they couldn't catch the dog in time. Schwein explained that the government would send official forces to take over the situation, and if the animal proved too difficult to capture, it would be killed immediately. The revelation that the dog would be executed shocked Ohjin deeply. Schwein began pleading again, more urgently than before, repeating that they were out of time and begging for help once more. As he stood there in desperation, Ohjin and Selena remained silent, caught in a moment of serious reflection. Ohjin stood silently for a moment, overwhelmed by a mix of confusion and concern about the situation. Eventually, he let out a sigh and scratched his head in frustration, asking Schwein where the dog was currently located. Ohjin clarified again that he was a veterinarian, not someone who had ever captured animals before, but admitted that he at least needed to take a look at the dog in order to form a suitable plan. Schwein was overjoyed to hear this and eagerly informed him that the dog was nearby, just a little higher up the slope. Still, Ohjin emphasized that he hadn't officially agreed to help yet. He was just going to assess the situation first. Selena, however, thought to herself that it was already obvious Ohjin had made up his mind to help. When they reached the location, Schwein pointed out the exact spot, explaining that the dog never left that area. Ohjin and Selena exchanged uneasy glances as they spotted the dog in the distance. The dog appeared extremely intimidating, baring its teeth and growling aggressively. Ohjin turned to Selena and, with concern, asked if this was the same shaman breed she had mentioned earlier. Selena confirmed it was. The dog stood before them in a pitiful state, covered in dirt, visibly exhausted and furious. Selena looked at Ohjin and once again explained that many people had recently started adopting this breed just because it was trendy. She added with a detached tone that many owners abandoned them just as quickly as they acquired them, leaving these animals homeless and angry. The dog remained in a defensive stance, clearly ready to attack, which heightened Ohjin's anxiety. Looking at the dog with sorrow, he thought to himself that it was obvious the animal hadn't eaten properly for the past 2 months, given its thin, worn-out condition. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from a distance, catching everyone's attention as they turned to locate the source. Ohjin noticed slow, deliberate footsteps approaching, and he began to wonder if there was another creature nearby besides the dog. At that moment, the dog became even more aggressive and let out a loud, fierce bark. Without warning, it charged at Ohjin with incredible speed, attacking him violently and catching him off guard. Selena quickly grabbed Ohjin and pulled him away from the dog's charge, shouting that what he had just done was extremely dangerous. As they ran, Selena explained that the worst thing one could do when facing an aggressive dog was to flee and turn their back on it. Ohjin shouted back sarcastically, asking if she meant he should have just stood there and let the dog maul him to death. But Selena quickly responded that running only excites the dog more, and that they needed to find a way to distract it fast. Unexpectedly, the dog stopped chasing them, which surprised everyone and left them confused by its sudden change in behavior. Selena, puzzled, asked why the dog had halted, especially since it was supposed to be one of the aggressive hunting breeds. Schwein confirmed that it indeed was. Ohjin, bewildered, questioned why the dog had retreated when it had been so close and so clearly enraged. The dog slowly and tiredly walked back toward a nearby dark cave, its body visibly drained. Ohjin noted that it had returned to the exact spot it had started from, which piqued his curiosity even more. Selena calmly commented that canine behavior was often difficult to interpret, while Schwein noted that the dog had always chased people like this. He added that these repeated incidents were the reason villagers had filed constant complaints about the animal. Ohjin kept staring, deeply contemplative, without saying a word. After a moment, he asked Schwein what kind of complaints the villagers had made exactly. Schwein explained that they were mainly about an aggressive dog barking in the mountains, which people believed posed a threat, leading them to demand its removal. Ohjin then seriously asked if anyone had actually been injured by the dog, and Schwein hesitated before answering. After a brief, awkward silence, Schwein admitted that no one had been hurt so far. He confirmed that the complaints had only been about barking and disturbances, not about actual injuries or attacks. Turning to Selena, Ohjin asked if she had previously told him that shaman dogs were known for their strong loyalty to their owners. Selena confirmed the fact once again. Selena calmly asked Ohjin if he had figured anything out from the dog's behavior, but he remained silent, deep in thought. The next day, Ohjin and Selena headed to the village nearest to the mountain. Selena, puzzled, asked why they were going to the village instead of returning to where the dog was. Ohjin explained that their task now was not to capture the dog, but to find its former owner. Selena was surprised by this decision and argued that it would be faster to catch the dog directly since time was limited. She even suggested setting up a bait trap, assuming the dog was hungry. However, Ohjin responded that he didn't believe food alone would be enough to lure the dog. Surprised, Selena asked him why he thought that, and Ohjin explained that if hunger were the dog's only problem, it wouldn't be in such a poor state. He added calmly that something mattered more to the dog than food. Ohjin clarified his thought further, saying that the commands given by the dog's previous owner were probably more important to it than food itself. He imagined a possible moment between the dog and its owner, a scenario in which the owner left and told the dog to stay in that exact spot, promising to return soon. Back then, the dog had likely been happy and obedient to those commands. He continued his reflection with sadness, saying the owner must have told the dog not to leave the place, and Selena added that she had met people like that in her own village too. Ohjin, filled with anger, expressed his resentment toward people who abandoned their pets while ordering them to stay, never returning. He said that if he ever found that person, he'd hit him first, then drag him along to show him what his dog had become. He emphasized the importance of making the dog's former owner see the consequences of his actions. Ohjin and Selena began asking around the village about the dog's owner. One woman complained that Gabriel's husband, a woodcutter, could no longer cut trees due to his fear of the dog. Some children said they didn't know the owner either, but mentioned that their mothers wouldn't let them go near the mountain because of the dog. Eventually, they encountered an elderly man who seemed confused and began shouting, asking which dog they meant. He angrily suggested they were talking about the dog that had taken all his money 10 years ago. Feeling exhausted, Ohjin sat on the ground beside one of the buildings. Selena approached and stood silently in front of him. She broke the silence by wondering aloud if the dog's owner might be someone from outside the village, then added that the only clear thing was that everyone in the village hated the stray dog. Ohjin, still confused, questioned how it could be that no one in the village knew the owner. But before he could finish his thought, a girl approached and interrupted, saying that the villagers indeed didn't know anything about it. She came closer and asked Ohjin directly if he was looking for the stray dog's owner, adding that he was the first person to ask about Jake. Surprised, Ohjin asked eagerly if she actually knew the dog's owner. The girl then asked him to come with her. Ohjin and Selena followed the girl to a house slightly outside the village. As they walked, she explained that Jake had lived away from the villagers, which was why no one really knew him well. When they arrived, Ohjin stepped forward and knocked on the door, thinking to himself that Jake must have lived there alone with his dog, far from everyone else. But no one was inside. The girl turned to Ohjin and gently told him Jake wasn't home, then asked him to follow her to another place. Still confused, Ohjin followed her, only to be shocked when they stopped in front of a grave nearby. It dawned on Ohjin with sudden weight that the place she had brought him to was Jake's grave. The girl began to explain that Jake had passed away 2 months earlier in a landslide accident, and she added sorrowfully that Jake had lived alone but was a very kind-hearted man. She continued, saying that while the villagers had blamed the dog's owner, Jake had never abandoned his dog. He simply hadn't been able to return to him because of the accident. Ohjin stood in silent reflection before the grave, deeply affected by what he had just learned, while the girl continued speaking with sadness, saying she had tried to bring the dog back herself, but failed. She went on, her voice trembling, to tell Ohjin that if he had come for that dog named Max, then she begged him to help him. Ohjin recalled an old image of Jake and his dog Max, both smiling happily, and was deeply moved by the girl's plea. He stood quietly for a moment, lost in thought, then slowly stepped closer to the grave and wished peace upon Jake's soul. He remained still before the grave, while Selena and the girl stood nearby in silence, watching him. Afterward, Ohjin turned to the girl and sincerely apologized for the misunderstanding the villagers had toward Jake. Then, with a tone of seriousness and determination, he promised her that he would do everything he could to save Max, no matter what it took. Meanwhile, a group of soldiers arrived at the village earlier than expected to carry out their mission to kill the dog. Schwein was startled by their early appearance and pleaded with them to rest for the day and return tomorrow. But the soldiers responded coldly, saying their previous assignment had ended early and there was no reason to delay this one. The commander insisted they carry out the task immediately, telling Schwein sharply that there was no need to wait another day. He added indifferently that the villagers hated the dog anyway, so no one would complain if they killed it a day ahead of schedule. At that very moment, Max lay exhausted on the ground outside his cave. He appeared so weak and frail that he could barely move, while the soldiers began preparing for the kill. Ohjin and Selena entered Jake's house, hoping to find something that might help them reach the dog. Upon entering, Ohjin was struck by the strong scent of medicinal herbs, leading him to wonder if Jake had been an herbal healer. He looked around with growing interest, searching for anything that might assist in calming Max. Selena suggested they take something with Jake's scent on it. Perhaps it could help soothe the dog, then began gathering some of Jake's clothes hanging on the wall. At that moment, Ohjin noticed a framed photo resting on a table. It showed Jake and Max together, both smiling with deep affection, and the image stirred powerful emotions in him. He stood there, eyes fixed on the photo, wondering how someone who had cared so deeply for his dog could meet such a tragic fate. Selena pointed out that Jake seemed to have been searching for the mandrake plant, which left Ohjin confused. She clarified what she meant by pointing to a wall-hanging image of the mandrake. Ohjin stepped closer to the image, puzzled, and asked about the plant, mentioning that he might have seen something similar in a movie. Selena replied that the mandrake was known for its piercing scream when uprooted. She added that it was a rare and extremely difficult plant to find, and every herbalist dreamed of discovering one due to its immense value. At that same time, Max sat outside his cave under a dark, clouded sky. Though he looked slightly better, he was still panting quietly and clearly fatigued. The scene shifts into a flashback. Rain begins pouring down suddenly, and Jake rushes toward the cave with Max to shelter from the storm, remarking on how unexpectedly heavy the rainfall was. Inside, Jake sat beside a small fire he had started for warmth, deciding to wait until the rain stopped before leaving. He noticed Max shivering from the cold, so he pulled something from his bag that he had prepared for just such moments. He wrapped the blanket around Max gently, telling him that he'd catch a cold if he stayed wet, and asked him to stay still for a bit. But Max began playfully squirming, bringing a smile to Jake's face as he laughed and called him a little rascal. Jake smiled gratefully, feeling lucky that they had found this cave to wait out the storm. At that moment, Jake spotted something strange and shiny on the cave floor, which caught him off guard. He hadn't known there was even a cave here. He moved in for a closer look and was stunned to discover a mandrake plant. Jake stared at the plant intently, excitement lighting up his face as he confirmed to himself that the shape and color of the leaves indeed matched those of the mandrake. Overwhelmed with joy, he exclaimed that he never imagined he'd actually see such a plant in real life, outside the pages of books. Filled with enthusiasm, he decided to rush back home to fetch his tools so he could properly extract the plant. He told Max he'd be back quickly. Max, sensing Jake was leaving, let out a sad whimper, clearly anxious about being left alone. Jake tried to comfort him gently, assuring him he wouldn't be gone long, and asked him to stay put. He promised Max he'd return soon and told him to wait inside the cave. With a cheerful smile, Jake stepped out, believing this was his lucky day. Max remained alone in the cave as heavy rain poured down outside, waiting patiently for his owner's return. Outside, Jake hurried through the storm, making his way toward home to grab his tools. The rainfall grew heavier as Jake pushed forward, determined. Suddenly he heard a terrifying rumble, the sound of earth shifting, which made him freeze and look around in fear. Panic overtook his face as he realized the danger unfolding around him. A landslide, triggered by the relentless rain, crashed down suddenly, burying everything in its path, and it was this disaster that claimed Jake's life. Time passed, the fire in the cave went out, and Max remained seated inside, unaware of what had happened to his beloved owner. He continued to wait alone, sorrow written all over him, while outside the skies cleared and a rainbow appeared on the horizon. A week later, some hikers passed by the cave and were startled to see a dog sitting alone inside, still waiting. As they approached, they clearly saw how thin and abandoned the dog looked. Feeling sorry for him, one of them suggested they give him something to eat. But when one of the men moved toward Max with food, the dog suddenly became aggressively defensive. He bared his teeth and growled menacingly. Startled, the two men recoiled in fear. One wondered aloud why the dog reacted so violently, while the other warned they should leave the area immediately. They quickly left, muttering in fear and frustration that the dog's aggression made it obvious why his owner had abandoned him. Max, now alone again, returned to the same spot inside the cave, continuing to wait faithfully for Jake's return. Back in the present, Max suddenly raised his head upon hearing footsteps approaching in the night. A group of people with rifles was heading toward the cave. Schwein nervously suggested that it was late, and there was no rush. They should rest instead. But the soldiers continued moving forward, and soon reached Max's location. The dog was clearly agitated and braced himself defensively. One soldier asked his companion if they had enough tranquilizer darts, and the other replied confidently that they had brought enough. After all, they knew they were dealing with a dangerous shaman breed. Schwein approached them in a panic, begging them to give him just one more hour because he had hired someone to help save the dog. He tried to convince the commander, telling him the dog had a story and had never harmed anyone before. But the commander coldly replied that they weren't there to listen to sad stories about a dog. He added that regardless of how touching the story might be, their job was to protect the citizens, and with that, he raised his weapon and aimed it at Max. Max, confused and scared, panted anxiously as the soldier prepared to shoot, but at the last second a hand grabbed the rifle and stopped him. It was Ohjin, hooded and calm, telling the commander that he was being far too hasty. Ohjin explained firmly that the dog could still be saved and asked them to wait a little longer. He looked at Max with compassion and called him gently by name, Max. Raising his hand slowly, Ohjin smiled warmly and told him that he had waited a long time. Max's tail began to move slowly, then started wagging faster and faster as joy overwhelmed him. He barked excitedly, his face glowing with happiness upon seeing Ohjin. The dog ran toward him, barking cheerfully with all his energy. Ohjin knelt and embraced Max gently, whispering with quiet sorrow that he was deeply sorry, for he wasn't the one Max had been waiting for all this time.